Hi, I'm Ollie, and in this Politics Explained video, I'm going to go through everything you need to know about state power classifications in A-level politics. I'm going to start by having a look at the parts of the specification this video covers, and some key 12 markers and 30 markers you can get asked on this content in the exam. From there, I'm going to have a look at great powers, emerging powers, and superpowers, giving some key case studies for each, and looking at how we define these different groupings in state power classifications. From there, I'm going to have a look at two key debates that could come up, especially in the 30 markers in your exam, looking at China in focus and whether China should now be considered a superpower, and very much linked to this, the argument about whether the United States is now a declining superpower. The notes you can see on your screen are part of an updated textbook on the global politics section of the Edexcel A Level Politics specification, which you can purchase on the Politics Explained website, where you can also find loads of other resources to help you in your politics A level, including essay plans for global politics, 12 marker plans for global politics, essay plans and updated textbooks covering every other part of the A Level Politics course, and a place to sign up for tutoring or some live revision webinars we're running before this year's exams if you're interested. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So starting off with the parts of the specification this video covers. This is the second of 5 videos that are going to be on the channel on the 4th subtopic of global politics for the Edexcel specification, and that's power and development. And we're going to have a look at the differing significance of states in global affairs and how and why state power is classified, looking at great powers, superpowers, including the United States, and emerging powers, including the BRICS and whether that's still a useful way to understand emerging powers. In terms of some key 12 markers and 30 markers you can get asked on this topic, so all of these 12 markers and 30 markers cover the whole of the power and development topics, and as I've mentioned in previous videos, all of the questions in bold, there are detailed 12 marker plans or essay plans for on the Politics Explained website that you can purchase. And if you know these questions really well and can adapt them to different questions and know the content in them really well, you should be really well prepared for the exam. In terms of some of the 12 markers you could get asked on this topic, of course, all of the 12 markers get you to kind of compare the similarities or differences often between two different organizations or classifications or groups or whatever it is. And I think here the key potential questions are getting you to look at comparing some of these state power classifications. So difference between great powers and superpowers, for example. You could also get asked the difference between two particular countries. So the factors that have led China and Russia, so there's a similarities question, being considered emerging powers in global politics. Or potentially the difference between two countries, China and India, or China and the United States, for example. In terms of the 30 markers, the key questions here, I think, are going to be around China and the United States and the relative power of each of them. And that's especially going to be in the second half of this video, the content we're going to look at for that. So one of the key questions you get asked is whether China is now a superpower. You can also get asked about whether the United States is a declining superpower and whether it can no longer claim global hegemonic status, or there's no longer unipolarity, which you can bring the next video actually into, the next couple of videos into a little bit as well. And they're really key questions that I think are actually quite likely to come up in this year's and future exams, because the exam would really like asking you about this topic. Starting off then by having a look at state power classifications and starting off with great powers. So when we speak about state power classifications, this is how we think about the international order and different states in terms of their level of power and how we differentiate between them in terms of how much can a state influence and dominate global affairs. They're often debated, these classifications, by those who analyse geopolitics and seek to understand the current nature of global politics and how it's changed over the decades and over the years. Starting off then with great powers. So great powers are nations with the ability to exert significant influence in international politics, economically, militarily, and diplomatically. They're often characterized by substantial resources, including large economies, advanced militaries and effective militaries, and active participation in international governmental organizations such as the United Nations, G7, and G20. Whilst great powers don't dominate global politics in the same way that superpowers do, as we'll look at later in the video, they play an important role in maintaining and shaping the international order. And superpowers actually need a number of great powers to support them in order to dominate global politics. So the world's current great powers, of course, this is all very much debated, but in my opinion, arguably include Germany, France, the European Union, Great Britain, India, Russia, and Japan. So then, if we had to kind of define them into some bullet points, The first one is economic strength, so they tend to have large and stable economies that influence global markets. Second is military capacity. They have robust militaries capable of projecting power beyond national borders. Diplomatic influence. They often take part in major international institutions. And global reach. They maintain influence across multiple regions. But I think you can also be a great power if you don't have all of these, if you're not really powerful in all of these. If you're extremely powerful in all of them, you'd be a superpower. So often it might be that you drop back in some of them. So I've got 4 key case studies in detail here. Japan, the United Kingdom, the European Union, and Russia. I'm not going to talk through all of them, but of course you can pause the video or purchase the updated textbook if you want to see all of them. I'm actually going to have a look at the United Kingdom and Russia. So the UK remains a prominent great power with a global GDP ranking of 6th, so it boosts a GDP of approximately $3.5 trillion in 2024. Crucial to its power is its economic power, and especially the City of London, which continues to be one of the world's leading financial hubs, responsible for around 37% of global foreign exchange trading, making the UK a really pivotal player in global finance. Its military is also rated top 10 globally, with a defence budget of $68 billion, including Trident. So it's got nuclear weapons and a really advanced Navy, Air Force, and Army. And because of its nuclear warheads and its actually historical power as an empire, it has significant power in international organisations. In the UN Security Council, for example, plays a key role in the G7 and in NATO. In terms of soft power, it also has some quite important and effective cultural exports, including music, higher education, and media. And post-Brexit, it sought to kind of reaffirm its global position through initiatives like Global Britain. I think if we look in a long-term perspective, though, kind of over the next few decades, you will see the UK kind of is going to decline relatively as a power. That particularly looks like the trajectory it's on, particularly with the politicians we've had over the past 15 years. Okay, so the European Union is also an interesting one, which is of course more powerful than the United Kingdom because it's got a combination of countries, and Japan as well, but I'm going to look in detail at Russia. So Russia remains a formidable great power, primarily due to its vast natural resources. That's something that the great powers, as we said, they may not have some things, but they have others. The United Kingdom doesn't really have great natural resources in terms of energy. It's got North Sea oil, but it's nowhere near the same extent as Russia. So it's got vast natural resources, military capabilities, and strategic geopolitical influence. So historically, Russia was a dominant superpower at the heart of the Soviet Union, and today it continues to wield significant power, especially in regional and energy politics. So its economy is 11th globally, with a nominal GDP of around $1.9 trillion. And its economic strength is largely derived from its energy sector, which gives it a great amount of geopolitical influence as well over other countries, because countries really need oil, they really need natural gas, and they need energy for their economies. So it's one of the world's largest exporters of oil and natural gas, supplies 12% of the world's oil and 17% of its natural gas, making it critical in the energy sector, particularly to previously, I guess, to European markets before the Ukraine war, and to Asian markets increasingly after the Ukraine war. However, the economy does remain vulnerable because it's quite dependent on natural resources, with half of government revenues actually tied to oil and gas exports. Its military, and crucially its willingness to use its military power, its hard power, as we looked at in the previous video, are one of its most defining features of it as a great power. So it's got a defence budget of approximately $86 billion, boosts the world's largest nuclear arsenal, and it maintains a powerful conventional military as well, ranking the second largest in terms of military personnel. It's demonstrated its military strength through intervention in Syria, Crimea, and more recently Ukraine, showing its actual capacity to influence regional dynamics and global security, and its willingness to project its power and try and achieve aims globally. Diplomatically, it also has significant influence. It's a P5 member on the UN Security Council, and it's kind of used that as well to block resolutions, particularly in relation to Syria and more recently in relation to Ukraine. And despite facing growing diplomatic isolation from the West, it continues to engage in global governance structures and is building some quite strong alliances with North Korea, for example, with China, and with Iran, which have allowed it to kind of project its power globally as well. The next classification we're going to have a look at are emerging powers. So they're nations that are experiencing significant economic growth, expanding political influence, and are increasingly playing more prominent roles in regional and global affairs. They may increasingly be increasing in power and may be then considered as great powers as a result of this growth. Globalization has driven the emergence of many of these powers, many of which have sizable populations, and have, through globalization and through global trade, have been able to turn this into economic, military, and diplomatic might, particularly through manufacturing as they industrialise and modernise. They may not yet possess the full spectrum of influence enjoyed by established great powers, but they're key players in shaping the future global order. Previously, the BRICS used to be considered the main emerging powers. So that's the BRICS is a kind of classification of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa was added as well. However, this is arguably now not too useful in my opinion. So China it can't be considered an emerging power anymore. It's easily a great power and potentially can be considered a superpower as well. And there's also a number of other emerging powers. Very difficult to kind of define who they are. For me, I think I'd like to define them as India, Brazil, Indonesia, Nigeria, Turkey, Mexico, and potentially Saudi Arabia and Iran as well. So the BRICS was coined in the early 2000s. I think it was originally, might be by Goldman Sachs actually, to describe a group of rapidly growing economies that are expected to significantly influence global economic and political affairs in the coming decades. They were characterised by having large populations, abundant natural resources, and fast-growing economies, allowing them to play an increasingly important role in global politics. They actually formalised their cooperation in 2009, holding their first official summit in Russia, and this marked the transition from an informal kind of economic concept to a cohesive political and economic bloc, and they've actually continued as a bloc since, adding other members as well, even if they're still only called the BRICS, and that has provided a bit of a challenge to Western dominance and Western alliances. So since then, the groups met annually at summits to discuss global governance, economic cooperation, and development strategies. And BRIC members have also established institutions like the New Development Bank, aimed at funding infrastructure and development projects in emerging countries. Through their cooperation and formation as a group separate from US influence, though it's significant, using them as a shorthand for current emerging powers, as I mentioned, is no longer useful for a number of reasons. So Russia shouldn't be considered as emerging due to its historical power. China's emerged so much that it's now considered by many actually to be a superpower, not even just a great power, and is far more powerful than the other members of the BRICS, even than of Russia. South Africa has been overtaken by many other powers, and a number of other emerging powers have grown in importance, including Indonesia, Nigeria, and particularly Turkey, actually, especially geopolitically. So we've got a number of case studies here, India and Saudi Arabia in particular. So first looking at India. So India's long been considered an emerging power, and it's now seen by many as a great power, largely due to its vast population, economic growth, and increasing international influence. It's the world's largest country in terms of population, with over 1.4 billion people, and its economy is the fifth largest, with a nominal GDP of about $3.4 trillion in 2024. It's been growing at a rapid rate, its economy, with annual GDP rates, growth rates around 6 to 7%, and it has an important technology sector, particularly in IT services, where it's a global leader. Its geopolitical influence is really on the rise. It's a major regional player in South Asia, and it exerts significant influence over neighbouring countries and plays a role in regional organisations like the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. Its military is the fourth largest in the world, with significant modernisation efforts, including advancement in space technology and defence manufacturing. It's an active participant in international diplomacy, and its military has nuclear weapons. Saudi Arabia is an interesting one, which I think can really be considered an emerging power due to its significant economic influence, almost entirely driven by vast oil reserves and its growing kind of projection of regional and global political power as a result. It's the world's largest oil exporter, and as a result is a key player in global energy markets, which allows it to exert influence not only over kind of smaller powers and countries in the world, but also the world's most powerful countries in China and the United States in particular. Its economy is the largest in the Middle East, has a nominal GDP of around 1.1 trillion, and under its Vision 2030 initiative, it's been making efforts to diversify its economy away from oil dependency, investing a lot in sport, actually, or in tourism, entertainment, and technology. Its geopolitical influence extends throughout the Middle East and beyond. It plays a leading role in OPEC, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, which is a kind of group of key oil exporters. And it maintains stability and is really important for balancing the influence of Iran in particular in the Middle East. It's kind of made strategic alliances with Western countries as a result, whilst also increasingly actually engaging with other powers such as China and India. The kingdom's military is the top 10 global defence spenders in the world, with a budget of around 75 billion, and it's highly modernised and has played an active role in regional politics, including the Yemen civil war. So yeah, of course, there are a number of other emerging powers, but there's some useful ones you can use as case studies. What we're going to have a look now at is superpowers. So superpowers are states that possess the ability to project major power across the globe in multiple dimensions: military, economic, political, and cultural. And unlike great powers, in my opinion, superpowers have to be predominant in all of these. They really shape international events, influence global governance, and maintain a dominant presence in the global economy and also in global military operations. They can crucially have the capacity to project power anywhere in the world, but also play a role in shaping the global order through both hard power and soft power. The term was originally used to describe the United States and Soviet Union during the Cold War, and today the United States is without doubt a superpower, and China is considered by many to have become a superpower in recent years. So we'll look at that debate in a bit. So how do we define it? It's got a global military presence, so it maintains military forces that can project power across the globe, including in a number of places at once. It's economically dominant, so it possesses the world's largest advanced economies that significantly influence global trade, finance, and investment. They shape international institutions and global governance. They have significant soft power to shape global public opinion and other countries. And they're often leaders in technology and innovation, which is, of course, particularly important currently if you look at areas like space, like AI, in particular, where you see countries really competing, particularly the US and China. So then, the case I'm going to use for this is the United States. Of course, we'll look at China and the debates on either side about whether it should be considered a superpower now. But following the end of the Cold War in 1991, there's no doubt that the United States emerged as the world's sole superpower, before it was a superpower in the Cold War anyway. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, it found itself with unmatched global influence, leading the world in military, economic, and cultural domains. Its military is by far the largest and most technologically advanced in the world, has a defence budget of $842 billion, actually accounts for 40% of the world's total military spending, and more than the combined military budget of the next several countries. It maintains hundreds of military bases across the globe, many of which were first formed in World War II, and that allows it to project power in every region, including in many regions across the world. It's got a vast nuclear arsenal, and it's been involved in various conflicts since the Cold War, including the War on Terror, the Gulf War, in the Balkans, and that kind of has demonstrated its capacity for global military intervention. Economically, it remains the largest economy in the world. It's got a nominal GDP of over $28 trillion, and it has unparalleled influence over global financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank. Crucially, as we looked at in the previous video, the US dollar is a real source of structural power. It's the world's dominant reserve currency, accounting for around 60% of global foreign exchange reserves, which gives it significant leverage over international trade and finance and over other countries. It plays a key role in many international organisations. It's got a veto on the UN Security Council, where it's a permanent member. It's by far the most dominant player within NATO and the G7, and it's been instrumental in kind of pushing its goals through these institutions. It's also got significant soft power, US cultural exports, but also technology lines. This is in part hard power, like Google, Apple, Facebook. I think you increasingly definitely add kind of Tesla, SpaceX, with Elon Musk having such significant power in global politics now. And also sought to kind of over the year promote kind of what it calls American values such as democracy, freedom of speech, and free markets that is really promoted through its foreign policy. Despite the rise of other powers, particularly China, the US has maintained superpower status through a combination of military strength, economic dominance, political leadership, and cultural influence. But recent challenges, particularly the rise of China, have sparked debates about whether the United States is in decline as a superpower. We'll have a look at that later in the video, though. Before doing so, though, we're going to have a look at China in focus. And I think this is really important. We're going to go into a bit of detail here, including into kind of the Belt and Road Initiative, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. You don't need to know all of this in loads and loads of detail, but I think understanding the story of the rise of China and the framing behind it is useful to understand and bring into debates about the current status of the world order, and whether the kind of status, the power classifications of China and the United States in particular. China's rise to prominence has been, I've put what here, one of, but by far the most significant for me, geopolitical development of the 21st century. Over the past 4 decades, China's transformed from an isolated, largely agrarian society into the world's second largest economy and a formidable global power. So driven by rapid industrialization and an remarkable average growth GDP rate of around 10% for much of the period. Before 2008, so effectively the shift to becoming a global power started with Deng Xiaoping in 1978, and it shifted away from a real communist planned economy towards opening up. This was reform and opening up under Deng Xiaoping, where he opened the economy to some market-oriented policies and capitalism. It really started China's rapid economic growth. So opening China to foreign investment, encouraging the privatization of some industries, and developing China's manufacturing sector, including through special economic zones such as Shenzhen. China grew from relative insignificance as an economy into one of the most important in the world. But its global influence remained primarily economic rather than geopolitical up until 2008. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, China continued to integrate into the world economy. A significant milestone was when it joined the WTO in 2001, which boosted its international trade exponentially. And by 2008, it became the world's third largest economy and a major player in global manufacturing in particular. China did maintain a low-profile foreign policy in this period, and this was very much intentional. So Deng's philosophy was hide your strength, bide your time. And it was really focusing on developing economically and becoming a big economy before seeking to exert itself, because it thought if it sought to exert itself too early on, then it might be shut down by the United States in particular. But by not exerting itself geopolitically and challenging the United States under Bill Clinton let it into the World Trade Organization and allowed it to grow, which is crucial to its growing economy and consequent ability to exert power. After 2008, you got Xi Jinping, the current premier in China. You saw China's real transition to global power. So it kept its head down, it hid its strength, but its time. It was now its turn to kind of project its power. It had enough economic power to start doing so. And particularly since kind of 2013, 2014, but we kind of can put this after the 2008 period. So after the 2008 financial crisis, which weakened many Western countries, particularly the United States, where it originated, and the European Union, China kind of really emerged, and that's in part because it emerged relatively unscathed from the financial crisis. It maintained robust growth and solidified its position as the second largest economy by 2010. And the financial crisis marked a turning point as China began to play a more active role in global governance and adopted a more assertive foreign policy. This has especially been under President Xi since 2012, which has been characterized by efforts to project China as a global leader, not only in economic terms, but also crucially militarily and diplomatically as well. Key to this has been the Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013, which aimed to extend China's influence across Asia, Africa, and Europe through infrastructure projects. And its military has also expanded significantly, with increased spending on modernizing the PLA, including its navy and missile capabilities. It's kind of really projects its power within its region, constructing artificial islands in the South China Sea and asserting territorial claims that have brought it into conflict with neighbouring countries and the United States. So its military spending isn't comparable to the United States. So I think it's maybe 3 or 4 times smaller than it. But part of this could be that it's some analysis. I've seen some analysis that it recognises that you don't need as much power. Its key aim is to project its power regionally, which it's been able to do with the size of its navy in particular, military, and it's developed nuclear weapons, but it doesn't need the kind of thousands that Russia and the United States have. It ultimately has enough to wipe out any other country on the world. It's kind of judged that it doesn't need the ability to do that 5 or 6 times over. Though that might change as the economy continues to grow and the kind of challenge between the United States and China for global supremacy becomes a bit more explicit. It might take on a bit more of a kind of Cold War dynamic. So we're going to have a look at the Belt and Road Initiative now, which was launched by Xi in 2013. And this is a key aspect of them trying really to start projecting geopolitical power globally and partly military power as well. So the aim of it is to develop trade routes that link China with other countries, kind of reviving the ancient Silk trade routes in kind of on land across China through to Europe and across Eurasia in particular, but also sea routes. And that's to help kind of link China to other countries, improve their trade, improve them economically, get key minerals, key resources for growth, particularly in technology sectors such as technology, but also with the implicit aim of gaining geopolitical power and influence over other countries. Over 140 countries have joined the initiative. It involves a vast array of infrastructure projects, such as building roads, railways, ports, energy pipelines, and communication networks to build those trade routes. And it's designed to enhance global trade and deepen China's economic ties with partner countries. It's divided in two major components, as I mentioned: the economic belt, which focuses on connecting China to Central Asia and Europe, so across Eurasia via land routes, and the Maritime Silk Road, which seeks to enhance maritime connectivity across Southeast Asia, the Indian Ocean, and beyond. Some of the key projects include the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which involves constructing highways between China and Pakistan, particularly Xinjiang in China and Pakistan. That's really important, in particular as an energy route and a potentially alternative energy route to going up through the Straits of Malacca in particular. This helps kind of China reduce its reliance on trade moving through the Straits of Malacca in the South China Sea, which theoretically the US military could cut off if it wanted to. So it's an alternative energy route for oil, which is really, really important to China's economy. And beyond infrastructure, it's kind of also strengthened economic ties and promoted industrial cooperation with participating nations. So it offers loans and investments to developing countries to finance these projects, these big infrastructure projects. However, this has led to some criticism of debt trap diplomacy. So in cases such as Sri Lanka's Hambantota port, where Sri Lanka has struggled to pay its loans, China's then actually gained full control over that port, even within another country, which has kind of highlighted concerns actually using it to try and gain key ports and military influence within other countries. It's used the Belt and Road Initiative to extend its diplomatic and strategic reach into regions where Western influence has traditionally been stronger. And Africa in particular has been a major focus, with countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, and Nigeria receiving significant investment, which is in part crucial because of their natural resources. And it's solidified China's leadership in global infrastructure development. So it's really key to kind of understanding China's projection as a global power and emergence, really as an attempt to emerge as a greater power, rise and have more influence. Also really important to understand is Made in China 2025, which was launched in 2015 and is really designed to transform China's economy from a manufacturing giant of kind of low-cost goods, which has been for a number of years, a number of decades now, into a leader in high-tech industries. And that's really important in it kind of continuing to develop economically and become a leader in the most important industries in the world, which enables it to really challenge the United States. So it's kind of trying to develop Chinese capabilities in key sectors such as artificial intelligence, biotechnology, aerospace, renewable energy, including electric vehicles has been a key one as well. It's invested heavily in research and development, aiming to become self-sufficient in critical technologies such as semiconductors and telecommunications, making it less reliant on the West, but also enabling it to challenge the West as well. So major companies like Huawei and Tencent become global leaders in technology. China is now the global leader in electric vehicles, particularly lower cost electric vehicles. It's actually been really successful, increasing the economic power of China, the geopolitical power of China in key industries and challenging the United States. The US has kind of criticized it for engaging in unfair subsidies and intellectual property theft. Nonetheless, it's really helped China close the gap in critical areas of technology and kind of really challenge US power. So then, given this rise of China, its growing power economically, militarily, technologically, geopolitically, in every way, one of the key questions you can get asked in the exam is whether China should be considered now a superpower. It's one of the most debated topics in geopolitics among scholars and policymakers, and there's a lot of differing views. For me, the best way to break it down, and this is also the best way to do in your essays, as you'll see if you purchase the essay plans as I do so, is into different types of power. So economic power, military power, I think the final one is geopolitical power and allies, and then judging it in these different ones and then coming to an overall judgment at the end. So these are your themes in your essays. Economic power, firstly, the argument that it should be considered a superpower. It's the world's second largest economy. It's had rapid economic growth. It's the world's largest exporter and holds a position of the largest trading partner of more than 120 countries, including many in Europe, Asia, and Africa. And that's been furthered by the Belt and Road Initiative, which has built those trade routes. It's become a dominant force in key industries like manufacturing, where it's 30% of global output, but also increasingly, as we looked at with Made in China 25, in key technologically important and strategically important global industries, such as technology, AI, semiconductors, electric vehicles. On the other hand, it can be argued that actually China's economy still remains heavily reliant on exports and investment, which exposes it to external economic shocks. Its per capita GDP is far lower than the United States still, and it has structural economic issues, such as a high level of corporate and local government debt, which has actually harmed its GDP growth in recent years, in particular some of these structural issues. Moreover, China's economy is confronting a significant demographic challenge with a population that's rapidly aging and a shrinking workforce. And this, coupled with a slow growth rate, which fell to below 5% in 2025, cast doubt on China's long-term ability to continue to grow economically and continue to challenge the United States. Militarily, on the one hand, it can be argued that it has the world's second largest defence budget. The PLA has made significant advances as a military, and it's kind of really extended its regional power and projected its power in the South China Sea in particular, and including in kind of other areas such as cyber warfare, space capabilities, for example, in the Arctic as well, where it's working with Russia a great deal, and it's kind of really going to become an increasingly important geopolitical arena. But on the other hand, China still lags far, far behind the United States in several critical areas. The US defense budget dwarfs China's. Its military maintains global presence through over 700 military bases, while China has less than 5. The technological gap between the US and China in terms of military equipment remains. And China's military is formidable and is powerful in its own region and in the South China Sea. It lacks the ability to project power completely globally in the way that the United States does, especially in a number of regions at the same time. And that's one of the important definitions of a superpower. You can argue that it's not a superpower as a result. In terms of its geopolitical power and allies, we can argue that China is a superpower because it uses economic influence to really gain strategic geopolitical leverage through the Belt and Road Initiative in particular, which has gained allies and power in relation to other countries. It's actively participated in global institutions. It has a permanent seat on the UN Security Council and a veto. And crucially, more recently, it's formed strong partnerships with Russia and Iran in particular, which give it significant energy reserves, where it kind of lags behind some other countries, including the United States, in terms of its kind of domestic natural resources. And as a result, it's been able to it can be argued this Russia-Iran axis, China axis, can really challenge the United States, its dominance, whilst it also exerts influence within the BRICS group. On the other hand, it can be argued that China lacks the kind of deep network of alliances that are needed to be a superpower, and that the United States has. So the United States has the UK, France, the whole of the European Union, actually, including Germany, Japan. It leads alliances like NATO, Australia as well. And by comparison, China has few formal allies, and that can be argued to limit its power. It limits its ability to influence the global community as a whole, protects its power globally, especially in comparison to the United States, and therefore it shouldn't be considered a superpower. Additionally, China's aggressive behaviour in areas like the South China Sea and its treatment of Uyghurs in Xinjiang have alienated many potential partners, particularly in the West. So countries such as India, which once saw China as a partner in emerging powers, have grown wary of its intentions, particularly with border clashes, and that's one where the US arguably now has more influence over China than India does. Than China does. The final element we're going to have a look at then is soft power. On the one hand, it can be seen as a superpower because it's made notable efforts to build its soft power, including through the Belt and Road Initiative, including through this investment in other countries of foreign aid. It's also built Confucius Institute in over 150 countries to promote its language and culture abroad, and has made significant contributions to climate change and global efforts to tackle shared challenges. Chinese tech companies are also increasingly powerful, such as TikTok, and it sought to use kind of COVID-19 vaccine as a way to exert soft power. However, I think in terms of soft power, this is one where it really does lag behind the United States, especially with the United States kind of Hollywood, global music, sports, which really remain unrivaled. as well as American universities, the US dollar as well, and China's authoritarian governance model have damaged its global reputation. Though on the other hand, you could argue that actually it's beginning to influence other countries in that regard, as we'll look at in one of the next couple of videos as well, actually. So there's some key arguments on either side on whether China should be considered a superpower. Of course, I think you can really go quite convincingly go either way on this debate, and it's one of the key questions you could ask in the exam. So make sure you know and can make strong arguments in your essays for these for this question really well. Very much linked to this, so I'm going to go through this quite quickly, is the debate over whether the United States is a declining superpower. We're going to look at some arguments here. We've already looked at some of this content already, so I'm not going to go through it in loads of detail. But first, you've got some arguments the US is a declining superpower. This is the argument that it remains the largest economy in the world, but it has a very high national debt, which kind of raises concerns about the sustainability of its continued spending. Income inequality continues to rise in the United States. Wages are stagnating for the middle class, and manufacturing jobs are being offshored. And it's kind of lost that manufacturing dominance to China in particular, which is kind of now the largest trading partner of over 120 countries compared to the US's shrinking share of global trade. So the US is still very strong economically, but it's declining somewhat. It's growing in its inequality, as it's kind of always done, to be fair, and China's taking over as a manufacturing giant, and that's limited its overall influence in the global economy. On the other hand, you got the argument that it isn't a declining superpower, is that it remains the largest, most innovative economy on the planet, driving in key sectors such as technology, finance, and finance in particular, AI, electric vehicles, space travel with SpaceX in particular are really important, and just key companies like SpaceX, Apple, Tesla, Google, Microsoft, which dominate global markets. Crucially, the US dollar is a real source of structural power for the United States. It remains a dominant global reserve currency and is using approximately 60% of global transactions. So that's really the other side of the argument. Is financially very dominant as well. Militarily, the argument that the US isn't a declining superpower is that it remains by far the world's most powerful, well-funded, and technologically advanced military. It's able to project power across the globe. It's got 700 military bases, far, far, far more than any other country. As we looked over China, it has less than 5. You can project its power anywhere in the world. It's got a massive nuclear arsenal. And whilst China's military rise is significant, the US is still far ahead in terms of military capabilities. I think it's very difficult to argue that the US is declining militarily. But you could argue that its kind of strategic effectiveness can be questioned. Its withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 damaged American credibility, and effectively the Taliban came back to power, while China's military rise, particularly in the South China Sea, challenges US dominance in the Indo-Pacific region in particular, and that seems a bit of a decline and a challenge to the United States. Geopolitically, the argument that the United States is declining as a superpower is that it faces increasing competition from China and Russia, both of which are working together to actively challenge the United States as a leader in the international order. The Belt and Road Initiative has given Beijing substantial influence and challenged the United States' influence over other countries. And Russia's aggression in Ukraine is further shaping global alliances, bringing North Korea, Iran into their kind of overall spheres of influence, and they're all working together. And at the same time, crucially, the US relations with traditional allies are being strained, particularly during Trump's first administration. It looks like it's going to be even more in his second administration due to his isolationist America First policy that alienated many in Europe and Russia. So that kind of damaging of those traditional allies and traditional relationships may increase China's influence over some of these countries and damage the US's influence geopolitically. On the other hand, crucially, the US is still a central actor in shaping international institutions and global governance in the United Nations, in the WTO, in the G7. And although China's gained influence through the Belt and Road Initiative, the US continues to be the preferred partner for many developed nations and their most great powers, as I mentioned earlier in the video, whilst it plays a vital role in addressing global issues. Culturally, it can also be argued that the US isn't declining. Hollywood has immense soft power, as does global media, the US's higher education. Universities dominate global rankings, attracting students from across the world, and its popular culture is really dominant, whilst its capacity for innovation and ability to attract talent from across the world reinforced its status as a leader in cultural influence and soft power. But then you've got a final argument that the US is declining, and that's actually domestically. And that's the US is grappling with deepening political polarization and domestic instability. You saw that with the January 6th Capitol riot, and just increasing polarization and violence and tension within the US political system. And it can be argued that this is going to spill over geopolitically and challenge the US as an international actor and its ability to project power globally. Congress is very much struggling to ever agree on anything or pass bills on really important issues like climate change, healthcare, and infrastructure. And these not only weaken the US's ability to respond to global challenges, but also tarnish its ability as a model of democracy and reduce its soft power. So it could be argued that actually one of the key arguments is that its challenges domestic challenge politically are really going to harm its international influence. So yeah, that was a pretty long video. Hopefully you found it interesting. For me, this is one of the most interesting kind of aspects and debates in relation to global politics. As I said at the start of the video, some of the key 12 markers you could get are going to be comparing the different state power classifications, for example, comparing great powers and superpowers, or comparing China and Russia, for example, China and the United States. You get, and some of the key 30 markers are going to be on those questions at the end. Is China now a superpower? Can the US no longer claim global hegemonic status? How much has the world order changed since 2000, for example? You could bring it into as well. Please let me know if you have any comments or questions in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next video.